Hello everybody, and today I gotta do another extra video, and this is gonna be practically speaking the last one because I'm getting tired of it a little bit. I made 3 videos about the new discovery of Bell's theorem, and now in my first video we talk about now we know the universe is not local. Einstein understanding of local realism is wrong, right? And but John Bell, who made Bell's theory, he said, well, basically, if my theory is correct, right, and these results are what they are, we had to either abandon one of the 3 assumptions, either abandon locality, abandon realism, or abandon both, right? No, right now every scientist has choose A, abandon locality. So everybody is either like scientist, philosopher, mathematician, whatever. If they are non-local realists or participatory realists or informational realists or indirect realists or pragmatic realists, you get the point. So no serious intellectual will choose B, like reject realism but maintain locality. That's just doesn't make sense. Now the point of those 3 videos I made is like, if this is the case, what will happen if we choose C, abandon both? We abandon both locality and realism, and if this is the case, what are the consequences of those things? And the point of these 3 videos were the consequences. In the first video, I just simply talking about the new non-local universe using non-local realism. In the second video was, if we choose option C, abandon both realism and locality, what are the consequences? And the problem is, this made the legitimacy of non-naturalist philosophies. So idealism, and its many variations, neutral monism, panpsychism, anything, in general that isn't metaphysical naturalism or ontological naturalism, whatever the term you prefer to use. So the point of the second video was, what are the consequences, and I show many links in the description, to see why the evidence points that way, or at least why we have a reason to believe that we had to choose the last option, abandon realism locality, even though I myself am a naturalist. To be more specific, a reductive physicalist, that everything is physical and everything is reduced to physical, right? But the point is, for intellectual like inquiry, like what will happen if this is the other option, right? And the third video we call Winger's friend, which is you think Scrivener's cat is like out there or crazy. Winger's friend is even more radical, and because we're studying Winger's friend for the first time in history, the last 5 years or so, now we're starting to test the theory. It may show that realism, objective reality is not even a thing, and may some legitimacy for non-naturalist philosophies. This does not mean, like I said in a previous video, that religion is true. It just so happened the certain philosophical position that religious people tend to view may have some legitimacy, but that does not mean that the religion itself is true or God is true. As the philosopher Stasis Bolis has made, who is a scientific realist, he said, even for example, if intelligent design was true, like there's evidence of it, it still does not prove God or idealism. If they just prove there was an intelligent design, it's like you cannot conclude something one thing and automatically assume the other is true as well, unless the philosophical position in question heavily connects to two, right? And third video about that Winger's friend, because the Winger, the guy who did the thought experiment, basically said if this is true, then by consequent dualism is true. So the video was trying to make a case for substance dualism, because there are different types of dualism. But Wenger was a substance dualist. People would on the internet, at least people who are only know about philosophy and religious discourse on the internet and not on academia, they just assume dualism equals religion or religious belief. That's not true. There's been many atheists and agnostics throughout history that were dualists. Karl Popper, the famous philosopher of science, was a dualist. Technically not a dualist. He himself said, I'm better than René Descartes, because he was a dualist who believed there's only two substance. I, on the other hand, am a pluralist with three substance. He said it like that in his last book. So if the so the point is, if this is the case, if what the videos were trying to do, if this is the case, if non-naturalist philosophies are true, out of the all different schools of thought, on the non-naturalist side of things, which one is the most likely? And I'm trying to read the academic literature to see this, and my best bet is pluralist idealism. And I'm going to make a case right now of pluralist idealism by the academic philosopher and scholar of religious studies and stuff like that, and specializing in the philosophy of mysticism and stuff like that, Paul Marshall, who makes a case for pluralist idealism. Because the most up-to-date academic literature I can find, there's been a resurgence of studying what is often considered paranormal activity, and if studies are led to believe, if these things are legitimate as they claim to be, and like I said in previous video about the Winger thread, links in the description there, these are academic peer-reviewed papers, by the way. This is not just from a website of if the christianityis true.com or something like that. This is like from the American Encyclopedia, no, not the encyclopedia, the American Psychology Association or Science Direct or Nature, stuff like that, right? To possibly prove the existence of parapsychology, remote viewing, mediums. For some reason, there's only been one study ever, for the first time in history, that was like 2021, 2022, so it's very recent. So for now, whatever future studies are gonna be, whether or not it validates or not, that's a different question, but the point is, regardless, examples are that from very restrictive forms of physicalism, where there are very different types, but does not, if they reject certain things that is often considered paranormal, which still can be explained under physicalist terms or approach, even if it proves its existence. For example, the possible existence of parapsychological phenomena under physicalism. For example, electromagnetic signal transmission, theories of telepathy, or model on wireless telepathy, where one's fashion model approach tend to draw on quantum physics, space-time, and other multidimensional spaces, where pure physical theories are supportable in the face of evidence remain to be seen, although there are serious difficulties. And quantum relativistic physics cannot be used with confidence as a basis for purely physical explanation, because the physics itself may turn out to depend on irreducible consciousness in a fundamental way. As noted, this is the most obvious a possibility of quantum physics, where non-numer Winger's interpretation give consciousness a role. One of the people who made these statements are David Chalmers and Harry Strapp. The same way may be true of relativistic physics and in space-time concept if relativistic freight dependence, the profound the dependence of distance and time measurement on the state of motion of the measure ultimately derives from the organization of consciousness from the multiple points of view. While under a reductive physicalist who in principle take parapsychological phenomena seriously, they are much less likely to support other possibilities. One example is postmodern survival, and to be more specific, when it comes to like the topic of afterlife, there's called the personal survival and impersonal survival. Personal survival is where your consciousness and personal identity survives bodily death, while impersonal survival is your consciousness survives bodily death, but your personal identity does not. Because it's difficult to invent a purely material basis of memory and personality that could survive disintegration of the brain and communication with the living or support afterlife existence of some sort. They will most likely dispute the genuineness of extreme wild facts, such as highly orchestrated synchronistic events and mystical perception of the universe, which can suggest the mind is far more integral to the world than we originally suppose. And judging the philosophies of mysticism, if these phenomena are true, And current medical studies of the existence of some parapsychological phenomena, if taken to be seriously or true, they may prove something worth useful to study, whether or not the cultural or political consequences are small or big, right? For all we know, you can prove the existence of a soul, for example, but society will remain practically the same because on a sociological ground, most people already believe it, so it's like it's not gonna change that much, you know. But still, studies now and with a resurgence of the filter theory of the mind in psychology and neuroscience, which inherently is a dualist philosophy, and studies of these types of things had to take into consideration of the resurgence and the new revolution of the of neuroscience. Well, people who believe in the cult of Carl Jung, for example, who's who his metaphysics and ontology of his John Pauli conjecture, a dual aspect monist approach of quantum consciousness, synchronicity, and collective unconsciousness, and it's been disproven and it's been problematic at best, and psychoanalysis in general is considered problematic to begin with. Well, the main problem is a retention to these categories, even though it's purported to be monism. The mental physical are joined together, but they're not fully integrated. Inseparable, yes, but different enough to be concomitant and mutually irreducible. The dualist mental and physical categories are effectively left intact, although now glossed as epistemic rather than ontic, when really both categories go for searching examination. If they are to be brought together successfully, the material physical category are constructed through a postmedian allocation property that assign only quantitative ones to the world at large, confining quality one to consider the other. But quantitative and quantitative properties are integrating experience, and the mind matter problem result from their artificial separation. The shift from substance dualism to epistemic aspect dualism does not address this fundamental mistake and brings no new insight and the soul dual aspect monism, although certainly an advance on dualism and physicalism and supported by and large and panpsychism fails to get the heart of the problem. This at least will be the view of monists who take a more radical approach, but again there's too many problems to deal with. And another problem is that for the idealist, especially if you are a monist idealist. And right now, there's a philosopher called Bernardo Kastrup who made the first peer-reviewed academic book that makes a case for idealism for the first time in 200 years, first time since Hegel. He is in the position of a non-dualist monist idealism, right? It was heavily influenced by Carl Jung and other Huxley, and basically perennialism in general, which I find that philosophy heavily problematic. And these people did a lot of damage in academia when it comes to religious studies, and mythology studies and stuff like that. And give it broad generalization and ignoring the complexity and the plurality of these ideas with their own in the consistent logic and internal logics. For example, he supposed that the existence of the expansion of consciousness, mystical experience, near-death experience, psychedelic experience, follow from an impairment of ordinary brain function that reduce disassociation from universal consciousness, or in his vocabulary, a mind at large. There is, however, a potential difficulty. If universal consciousness consists wholly of instrumentation along the lines of desire and fear, as he supposed, it is not clear why mystical near death expansion typically bring extraordinary clarity of perception and depth of knowing, profound calm, and sometimes irreclusive love, suggesting an advanced mind. He points out to a resolution to this apparent difficulty when he mentioned that instinctual transpersonal consciousness is qualitative rich, or hinting that there is more to the outer structural birthday and the self concept that is commonly supposed. And because of the problematic nature of monist idealism when it comes to these phenomena, if taken to be actual phenomenon that has metaphysical implications, right? Mystical experience, out of body experience, near death experience, parapsychological phenomenon, etc. Even though ontological naturalists reject these things, but like I said in my previous video, what will happen if we choose the third option? We abandon both realism and the locality. These are the consequences that we have to deal with. The point is, the problem with these, what are the best alternative, and in comparison with all these different philosophy, like a dual aspect monism, neutral monism, subject idealism, monist idealism, is the panpsychism, which there are many different schools of thought, by the way. It's very complicated. There's like the more naturalist approach of pan-protopsychism all the way to cosmo-panpsychism. There's also a pluralist idealist approach of panpsychism, of process philosophy, etc. It's complicated. There's very different schools of thought. But if we gotta compare all of these, if these things experienced, like I mentioned earlier, are to be taken serious actual metaphysical phenomenon that has metaphysical implication, there is more likely of a pluralist idealism. This is why it's called, Paul Marshall has described, a monadological idealism. Fager remarked that his consciousness unite are conceptually similar to Lipson's basic unit of perception, the monads. There are indeed similarities. Both kinds of units are mind-like. Both are wholes, or at least part wholes in the case of consciousness unit, but are ontologically prior to space, time, and matter. Both have an indirect sense of their fellow unit. Both are striving beings, and both emerge from prior reality. One, no doubt there is a significant difference as true. If Reg is one, as the totality of potential and actual existence is different by Lipsing's the idea of God or and Freaki's consciousness, which comes into being sequentially as self-perception of one, differ from Lipsing's monad, which are set up together by God at the creation for Lipsing's theological philosophy. Leibniz metaphysics is applicable to the rogue phenomenon. Although it requires modification, it is to support mystical explanation of consciousness of other types. And give only a brief overview, Lip's theory of monads, the ontological, is open to interpretation, but understood in idealist fashion is to take the universe self-contained, mind-like entity characterized by perception and appetition. Perception is the monad's internal representation of external things or other monads, while appetition is the striving its dynamic tendency to have new perception. It could therefore be said that the monads have two fundamental aspects, but this is no dual aspect monism, for both perception and appetition are mental or mind-like properties, and the material/physical is reducible to them, hence the idealism. By thinking perception and appetition to be fundamental, Leibniz has treated his own experience as a human being as more or less indicative of the nature of the world in general, such as Aldous Huxley, Alfred Whitehead, and Bertrand Russell. It is perceptual / cognitive, and appetitive / volitional, reflected to the intellect and will of its divine creator for Leibniz. Monads are subject with cosmic perception. They are spatial and temporally inclusive because a monad, by perception represented within itself, all other monads from its own sequence of vantage point represent the entire universe. Monads differ in the distinctness of their perception, which are confused and unconscious for the most part. Lacking discrimination, although more advanced monads, those that represent themselves as having animal and human bodies, and those with a sense of organs and nervous system have more distinct perception in the form of sensation and mental representation. Note that mind or consciousness for the perception is extremely indistinct. Perception is essentially to the constitution of all monads, including the most primitive and spurious or bare monads, while sensation, consciousness, and basic mental representation, including memory, begin with animal body monads, or Lipsis called it soul, and advanced mental representation, including a perceptive, reflected knowledge at either state of self or consciousness with human body nomads. Like perception and appetition, the most basic is unconscious, but its more developed monads also take a form of conscious appetites, desire, volition, even and retro seeking after the good in Platonic words. There is no concrete universe apart from the cosmic nomadic perception, and so matter, space, and time had to be understood in terms of changing nomadic perception and the way they represent one another. Matter, space, and time, although well-founded phenomena, are not basic. There are appearances, but appearances grounded in reals, which for Leibniz are the nomads and their divine source, and source that synchronize them and their creation. More especially, the matter is the representation configuration of basic nomads in the perception of the mind. Physics, as the science of matter and motion, would be dubbed the behavior psychology of every dull passive mind. However, the whose behavior show little or no variation other different describable by laws and largely predictable, or as Charles Sanders Peirce put it in his objective idealism drawing on Schilling's matter is a fictive mind, invertebrate habits becoming physical laws. The monadology is a kind of panpsychism or pan-experientialism, a pan-perceptualism, which the elemental units of the world are perceptual and epithetic, but very loosely minerals, plants, animals, or fallen monads, although only organisms not aggregated had a chief monad, essential or dominant nomad. A rational mind, in the case of humans, as the special kind of panpsychism, monadality avoids the combination problem of the constituent micro psychism, or a monadic subject as a true unity, a seamless cosmic perceptual whole is not compound of other objects. There is no combining of micro subject to generate macro subject, but a monad does represent within a perceptual continuum all other nomadic subjects, and configuration of these representations make up what we make to be material bodies. The modality can perhaps be constructed as a type of cosmopsychism. A monad is a cosmic subject perceiving the entire universe as an object, but if this is cosmopsychism, is special kind because the universe is multiplying expressed in the perception of the many monadic subjects. The limitation problem is not serious for modality, for the multiplicity of subjects is built into the system at the start. Each monadic perception is by definition a cosmic representation of the many in one. Still, it is necessary to account for the limited scope of monads, a conscious perception. The principal limitation in Leibniz's system is matter, which in the idealist reading is simply confusion, the confused representation and configuration of other monads, and the passivity that follows from confused representation. Anticipating filter theory, Leibniz explained that his confusion is beneficial to organism because it keeps unconscious what would be distracting holes of perception and discrete appetition. Leibnizian monadology has, of course, its own well-known theoretical hurdles, notably the cause self-sufficiency of the all-inclusive monadic subject, their pre-established harmony with one another, and their dependency on supreme divine mind. Over the centuries, the system being adjusted or extensively reformulated by many thinkers, some of whom have fitted windows and doors into monads. I shall not dwell here the application of monadality to parapsychological phenomenon, and other similar phenomena. For there I took a price observation of all the great classical philosophers. I sometimes think that Leibniz is the one whose idea are most suggested for the psychical research. For Price, explained that Leibniz metaphysics made the paranormal completely normal since nomads contain a universe of unconscious perception. Nomads are latently omniscient and so in principle could know anything if some of these subconscious perceptions make their way into consciousness. Price drew on the filter theory and other similar psychological phenomenon. Leibniz monads, a complete unit, carry with their past and future, and Leibniz as a Leibnizian philosophy of Paul Marshall was of opinion that his metaphysics was consistent with precognition of the psychology. However, to account for mystical expansion of consciousness, including the very expansive cosmic variety, it is necessary to revise Leibnizian monadic perception by removing its inherent confusion in making it fully distinct and basically more secular, a very major change to the theory. Confusion now pertains to a monad's limited body, mediate sensory representation, with its total nomadic representation are perfectly clear. Without this inversion, a monad could never expand its very limited field of perceptual distinctiveness. The evidence suggests the expansion of consciousness do occur as to the theory of monads, as in the modification a morality to support some form of post-mortem survival. Morality can also used to be a basic explaining mystical experience other than the full-blown cosmic variety. For example, a panpsychist intuition of conscious being in nature will follow when mystic beings do access their deeper perception for there, the multiplicity of fellow subjects representative, and experience of divine presence of unity with higher selves, or whatever term you want to use. Who follows modality discovery cosmic selfhood or rootedness and supreme and managed sources from its rise. Given the application list is brought to the wild facts, it should be not surprised that Alfred Wine has processed philosophy with his depth to ellipsis is also applicable to the racial phenomenon. A Wahinian approach will also be similar to style Lipsian one, although Wine has significant diversion ellipsis meaning there will be differences too. For example, open future or witness process philosophy means the other phenomena is not accepted as genuine, like for example, pre-cognition is not accepted. For a monist and a pluralist approach of idealism, the fight between those two, for idealists, the X behind phenomena is not either super or mysterious, it is mind or mind-like, or one mind or many minds, the numerical monism and pluralism, respectively. The numerical monism is the view that only one concrete thing really exists, the whole indivisible of the world, the cosmos. They call this view monistic, in contrast with the pluralistic. Monism in numerical sense to be distinguished from monism in the substance sense, which is claimed there is just one basic kind of substance, as idealists, materialists do aspect monism, and neutralists claim in these various ways. Let us monist to refer to this one substance position contrast with the dualist is common antithesis. For example, idealist is monist because they claim there is just one basic substance which is the mind. But it can be monist or pluralist. The former of this possesses just one concrete instance of mind, the latter possesses of many instances. As usual, distinctions are not as straightforward. They might appear in the case of idealism. The singular one mind or total experience of monistic idealism is typically a whole that includes within itself a plurality of dependent subsidiary minds that are attributes some degree of reality of their own, a many in one. Monism omits the existence of the rest, but the pen part has been called priority monism, for it gave a priority to the whole, and is contrast with uncompromising existence monism that recognizes only the reality of the whole. Hegel's metaphysics, as described by McGinn, looks like a priority monism, similarity to the idealism of subsequent absolute idealism, with their all-inclusive absolute or eternal consciousness, or the F.A. Brady placed numerous finite centers of experience in the absolute, compares some aspect to Lipsian monadic center, but dependent parts of one total experiences. More recently, it has followed similar path in Spring's panpsychist idealism, and some present-day cosmopsychism also offer priority monism. Conversely, the many minds of pluralistic idealism can depend on one supreme mind without being subsumed by it, a many plus one. Berkeley's idealism has its many finite mind distinct from the infinite divine mind, but dependent on it for the ideas of sense. Lips's methodological idealism, in part a pluralistic response to Spinoza's monist philosophy, has an infinite number of minds or mind-like beings, derivative of and dependent of divine mind, but each of self-contained totality, unlike Berkeley's finite minds. In the heyday of the Anglo-American idealism, but both monistic and pluralistic, as they were represented the former of monism indebted to Hegel, and the latter were reaction against the totalization flaws of Hegelianism, which according to critics make finite individuals less than real by subserviating them to absolute. Pluralistic response to take form of personal idealism and methodological idealism. One of the best examples is the J.M.E. McTaggart, although a precursor would be the best defender often considered pluralistic idealism would be William James, one of the founding fathers of pragmatism. Wingham can be induced among the personal idealism of the pluralistic kind, if it is allowed that his process philosophy as a radical transformation of Lipsian methodology is a form of pluralistic idealism, given that its actual occasion are perceptual, striving such and therefore mind-like. In William James' 1909, A Pluralistic Universe had offered a pluralistic alternative too, which each form sent against monistic idealism or form, and drawing inspiration from Fetcher and Bergson. Contrast between numerical nominalism and pluralism receives some attention, centered on James' critique of absolute idealism. There, James was preferred for his distrust of extra reasoning alone as the path to philosophical truth for his associated advocacy of expanded empiricism or radical empiricism. His ethical and aesthetic dissatisfaction with absolute also struck a chord, but even if James' hostile characterization as absolute idealism, that unintelligible pantheistic monster, was justified, the possibility remained that some kind of idealist priority monism, respectable of the finite for its intrinsic value and receptive towards a broad empiricism, could be a strong candidate metaphysics. In the monistic outlook is represented by McGee's discussion of Hegelian and neo-Hegelian idealism, a numerical monism because the universe is taken to be only true concrete individual, the true is the whole, a priority monism because dependent parts are recognized true even if they are abstraction for the whole. As McGee puts it, each thing, what is by virtue, in its place within the whole, through relations with all other parts of the whole, and through the immanence of the whole in part. Bernard Castro analytical idealism and monistic truth, with its one universal consciousness that contains disassociated authors, while Frege's philosophy of consciousness unit has more pluralistic feel. Donald Hoffman's conscious realism deserves mention too, for it maintains the world conscious or conscious agents, and consciousness is fundamental. It therefore counts in pluralistic idealism, or at least phenomenalism. Velmo's reflection monism is monistic, although it does have a multiplicity of agents manifestation of the transcendental ontology, perhaps even more than like units at a deep level, understood to be psychophysical, as everything else is Velmo's dual-aspect monism. Given these options, and many others too, monist and pluralist dual-aspect neutral monist and idealist had one goal about deciding between them. They can, of course, be studied for their consistency as solution to the mind-body problem, including the effectiveness with they tackle the problematic property distinction, the nature of matter, space and time, and the perceptual process. They can also be appraised in William James fashion, or as the working hypothesis, informed by and tested against a range of accredited and wild facts. It's often said that idealism was found wanting in the former respect, unwilling or unable to engage with late 19th century and early 20th century development in the physical and biological sciences. This may be true of the absolutism presented by Bradley, but it hardly applies for the ontological pluralism represented by Whitehead, who took an interest in the science of the day. In this article, we have Frege's pluralistic engagement with quantum physics and information being, albeit information made live, quote-unquote, and meaningful in its aspiration to derive physics for his consciousness student. In this, he matches Hoffman's ambition to turn conscious realism into science through a mathematics of conscious agent and their network, showing how conscious agent generates space-time, objects, physical dynamics, and evolutionary dynamics, gets back quantum theory and general relativity. Although Hoffman's conscious realism is the current form looks to slant to the ground such an ambitious project, the general outlook can be applauded, including Frege's comparable aspiration, which is to explain the concepts of space, time, matter, and energy from the nature of consciousness unit and uncover physics we do not know yet. Thus it followed then the pluralistic metaphysics, also represented by Whitehinian approach, is more capable of providing a cogent framework for modern physics than the monistic alternative of idealism. It would be premature to answer in a affirmative without first looking into the scientific relevance of the monist alternatives. Absolute idealism insisted that there is no isolated entities, all things having the whole implicit as their ultimate context, resonate with holistic tendencies in the modern science, including ecological and quantum holism. In this article, McGee points out the Errol Harris in particular argued the relevance of Hegel's metaphysics to contemporary science, including physics and biology. McGee's Hegelian holism, all days interrelated, each defined by its place in whole, has resonated with the Leibnizian metaphysics, which is multi-representative cosmic monads, also with mystical literature, which contains some description of profound interconnection and interpretation. Bernard Castro also engaged with the scientific literature, making a case for his analytical idealism is consistent with Carlos Ravelli's relational interpretation of quantum mechanics. While the monist philosophy are real contenders and benefit from the simplicity and numerical impersonalism that comes from all things being included in just one whole, The pluralistic idealism is more plausible for several reasons. For one thing, the monoduality has the very definitive concept of the basic unit at the root of material structure, that is, the monad, which today may be open to mathematical modeling. If cosmologists can model the universe, its shape, dimension, interior structure, and evolution, as they routinely attempt to do, then so too can be monad to model since it is repressive in the universe. It may even be possible to construct testable models of modality. For another, its organizational experience into multiple cosmic perspectives is suggested in the frame dependence relativistic physics, and its holism, a usually represented cosmic unit, provide one of the several entry points into the quantum world. It seems possible that fundamental physicists have been hinting at the pluralistic idealist approach, especially Lipson's approach of structure of reality, for more than a century. Monadology also better captured the plurality of cosmic mystical experience and cosmic subjects. In a monistic scheme, there could be just one cosmic perspective, then one cosmic subject, but cosmic consciousness is a democratic affair, open to many individuals. If the mystical reports are to be believed, each assessing it from their own spatial-temporal vantage point, which suggests again the consciousness in the cosmic level is organized not from one perspective, but of many. And this leads to the topic of postmodern survivals. And there's a certain because of the resurgence of these non-naturalistic philosophies in the sciences, there is, however, a substantial body of evidence that neurophysiological shutdown of the brain is not terminal event. It appears to be. It was this kind of evidence that originally cited by the Sursen wheels turning in the late 1990s, as Michael Murphy explained the preface. They emerged from those of the mini bringing together 70 evidence of postmodern survival, much less the challenges of physicalist preconceptions. One conclusion for coming for the exploration for this was survival evidence, as addressed by the survival hypothesis, according to which something really does survive death, then by the super psi hypothesis, or more specifically the living agent psi hypothesis, according to which information apparently clean from source beyond the grave really comes from psi communicating involving only living person. In my previous video, I put links in the description of the most up-to-date literature, and again I found peer-reviewed academic paper of meta-analysis and systematic review that possibly post the existence of such phenomenon. Again, this is the first time ever we had these types of studies, so whatever the future says that will debunk or validate the first studies, that would be uncertain at the moment. Phenomena supporting the conclusion were the mediumistic case involving proxy seater jumping communicators under extreme physiological condition. Evidence for postmodern survival summarized in transmediation and crisis operation. Again, it was emphasized the evidence is about that can be of high quality as everyone who takes the time to examine and think with what the evidence uphold. However, the type of survival integrated data is not just persistent on a simple or rudimentary consciousness which itself will be a starting from which will go against certain naturalistic theories, although there are naturalistic theories of the afterlife, by the way, they do exist. We just assume it's not. But it's also personal survival of some kind, where your consciousness and personal identity survives. And the challenging of the production theory of mind and the support of survival is presented by Bruce Granson and Jim Tucker. For example, Granson one film features a near-death experience that are theoretically challenging to the conventional neuroscientific position, including accurate perception from vision point outside the body and clarity of mind with compromised state of the brain. Although people will criticize it because they're anecdotal at the examination and in a pyramid, in a hierarchy of evidence, the anecdotal is like at the bottom, sometimes not even in the hierarchy, so take it what you will. For example, in counter-scientific take place, person will not know to have died, or chapter points out a strong case of these things or phenomenons. Such frameworks supporting a survivor look at center stages and certain medical and given if these are led to believe, the comprehensive cells and stuff like that, or empirical evidence suggest that personal survival can take place, although the details of when, how, and why are from clear. Although many defenders of the monist idealism believe in impersonal survival, although if the evidence are taken to be serious, it should not be taken as confidence because the consistent personal survival. According to Velmos reflect monism, all manifest things eventually revert to their origin, the indestructible ground of being, that is both conscious and energy. It's not distinguished, but there can be anything other than supreme pure consciousness energy that survives, although not compelled to do so by his philosophy. Thereby thus accept the possibility of individual survival if the ground of being in the primordial manifestation produce monad-like entities, and not they are sufficiently individualized to support or evolve identity across lifetimes. Thus the support continuing the identity. Wilmot thinks it is necessary to introduce plurality at a deep level of his monistic system. McGee does not discuss the postmodern survival, but he is the opinion that Hegel's metaphysics provide no foundation with to justify personal survival. Apparently, Hegel does not consider the possibility, and his monistic figure gives us no reason to think the individual selfhood will endure. However, individual human life does contribute to the whole because it is the way in which the universe becomes self-conscious. Moreover, McGee points out that Hegel invites us to the question the nature of selfhood, and this may lead us to find our true identity in the whole, in the absolute. Castro also does not accept the personal survival, much more likely scenario according to Castro, the base of the autoculturable metaphysics of universal consciousness, the indestructibility of the will. But he also said leaves room for the possibility because in the essence what we survive for the essential I as the I of the universal consciousness, where there is no personal survival but true identity remains, a typical monistic position. And Philip Gould also have a similar position. And Hegel's philosophy, which is deeply ingrained pluralistically of consciousness unit, is friendly toward personal survival. He explained that when a body dies, ego consciousness will lose its ability to absorb the physical world, but it will retain its connection to the larger consciousness to support it. So there is survival of ego consciousness. Even though no psychology used the term ego anymore, this is more of an outdated 1920s psychoanalysis terminology, but regardless. Even discovery of a true self in the greater consciousness. Frigg's speculation is compared to an astronaut who learned to fly a lunar lander through a series of sessions in simulation. In the analogy, the series of sessions stands for a series of lies because he believed in reincarnation. But if we take the paper of the mediumship seriously, it doesn't support the reincarnation at all. Equally, you have used virtual reality analog to user and their avatar representation in a computer game. But astronaut analogy is more expressive. Lipson's idealism is a deep-rooted pluralism that does support continuity of identity. Monads is simple, uncompelled sums that are indestructible, and there is no real death, just transformation of the body associated with monad. Moreover, personal survival is guaranteed by monad's own exclusive perception, which retains impression of everything which has previously happened to it. And their immunity to thorough reobservation to the divine ground are recommended them in the 19th century occultists who describe evolutionary process transmigration for the natural worlds, and this was a common theme during the 19th century, although not all of them. However, the monadology requires modification like some death-related phenomena. For example, monads will lead us to think the perception of human body monad will become much like distinct at death when the sense organ fail, leaving only highly confused perception. However, near-death experience can be taken to indicate a great spectral clarification of perception takes place at death. They invert perceptual structure of monad that I suggested earlier, according to which basic monadic perception is perfectly distinct, fits better with near-death and mystical experiences. Moreover, the Lipsian monadology supports a special kind of transmigration of the substractional norma or metamorphosis, which monads are never fully digest of their body. It does not allow transmigration for natural beings such as human body nomads. If the Dada-1 case are to be taken seriously, it should be then modological, with the dispersed with artificial distinction between afterlife trajectories of substantial and rational nomads among human nomad can pass. Personal survival is not so certain in Wittian pluralism, given the more fragile inferior nature monad basic unit. Lipsian monads are extremely robust, while one has actual occasions or fleeting pulsal experience, and the only afterlife they have individually after the loss of subjectivity is objectification of consequent nature of God. However, that does not mean that personal survival is impossible. For the society, an actual occasion that constitutes a mind conclusively persists, and such an activity will no longer depend upon the actual occasion that formally supported the mind. This postmodern scenario, endorsed by Griffith, has been extended to include continuity of identity across many lives. To take witness process philosophy is a starting point for his idealist process philosophy, combining it with the ideas subjective consciousness to provide framework for personalized survival. But we all think in conclusion, the pluralistic idealism looks like the most likely option, because a better agreement with the insights of relativistic physics with frame-dependent distance and time measurement, which is the base of all the physical properties. It better fit the evidence of cosmic mystical experience, which suggests there is not just one cosmic subject experience, as cosmopanpsychists had tended to assume, but many constant subjects with their own cosmic experience. According to this slide, I thought each one with the cosmic subject at a deeper level of self had the potential accessibility of these experiences to us.